It was minus 20 degrees in downtown Bozeman, Montana. Snow fell softly, glittering under the winter sun, when Jack Walker, a former Navy SEAL, stepped onto a forgotten dock beside a rusted 1960s yacht no one wanted anymore. People had laughed at him that morning, said the boat was junk, scrap metal at best, but the laughter stopped cold when a deep, dangerous growl sliced through the quiet harbor. Jack looked down and saw his 45-kilogram German Shepherd, muscles tense, scars earned in war, clawing at the yacht's wall like something was trapped inside. Jack's SEAL instincts flared. This wasn't fear. This was a warning, because hidden behind that rotting wood was a secret someone had killed to protect. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, subscribe for more unforgettable true-style stories. Bozeman, Montana, in winter, was a city carved from ice and light. Snow lay thick along the Gallatin River, reflecting a pale sun that never warmed, only revealed. The air sat at minus 20 degrees Celsius, sharp enough to sting exposed skin and burn the lungs with every breath. Cars moved slowly through streets lined with frost-bitten pines and brick storefronts dusted white, while the river dock stood quieter than usual, wood planks creaking softly as ice shifted beneath dark water. This was not a forgiving place in winter, and it had never pretended to be. Jack Walker stood at the edge of that river dock, hands buried in the pockets of his heavy canvas coat, staring at a rusted 1960s yacht tied to slip 47 like an abandoned memory. Jack was 35, tall and powerfully built, the kind of man whose presence felt solid before he spoke. His face was sharply angled, with a squared jaw shadowed by a permanent 5 o'clock beard, dark brown hair cut short in the military habit he'd never shaken, and eyes the color of cold steel, eyes that noticed exits, reflections, and movements without conscious effort. Years in the Navy SEALs had etched discipline into his posture and restraint into his expression, but those same years had also left him quieter, slower to trust, and quicker to sense when something was wrong. Combat hadn't made him cruel, but it had stripped away his illusions. Beside him stood Ace. Ace was a 4-year-old German Shepherd, massive even by his breed standards, weighing nearly 45 kilograms, his black and tan coat thick and glossy despite the cold. His ears stood erect, scarred slightly at the edges from old encounters, and one pale slash crossed his left shoulder where shrapnel had once torn flesh during an overseas deployment. His amber eyes were intelligent, constantly working, reading the world in scent and sound the way Jack read terrain. Ace had been trained for war, but more than that, he had learned loyalty in the most brutal classrooms imaginable. He didn't bark without reason. He didn't growl without cause. The phone call had come 2 days earlier while Jack was repairing a snowblower in his garage. A lawyer from Spokane, formal and distant, had informed him that a distant uncle, someone Jack had never met, had passed away and left him a single asset, an old yacht moored near Bozeman. No money, no explanation, just the boat. Jack had assumed it was an administrative headache at best, scrap metal at worst. He'd considered selling it sight unseen, but something, maybe habit, maybe instinct, had told him to look first. As Jack stepped onto the yacht's deck, the wood groaned beneath his boots, softened by rot and age. Rust streaked the white hull like old blood. Algae clung stubbornly along the waterline, and cracked windows stared blankly at the frozen river. The vessel had once been elegant, its lines still hinted at craftsmanship and pride, but neglect had claimed it thoroughly. Jack exhaled slowly, already calculating costs, repairs, liabilities. Ace moved ahead of him. The dog froze the moment his paws touched the deck. His hackles rose slightly, muscles tightening beneath his coat. Then came the sound, a low, vibrating growl that rolled from his chest like distant thunder. Ace stepped forward, nose pressed close to the wooden wall of the main cabin, and suddenly scratched hard, claws raking the panel as if something inside had shifted, breathed, or remembered how to be alive. Jack stopped instantly. That sound, Ace's growl, was not fear. It was recognition. "Easy," Jack murmured, his voice calm, controlled, though his pulse had quickened. He scanned the dock behind them, the water, the nearby boats. Nothing obvious moved. The marina lay bright under the winter sun, empty save for a few distant figures working on their own vessels. Still, Jack trusted Ace more than his own eyes. He reached for the main cabin door and pulled. The hinges shrieked in protest as the door opened and sunlight poured inside, slicing through dust motes that glittered like frozen stars. The smell hit him next. Old paper, metal, salt, and something sharper, almost electric. The cabin was not empty. It was crowded. Charts covered the table, walls, even the floor, marked with handwritten coordinates and annotations in tight, deliberate script. Journals lay stacked in uneven piles, their covers worn, pages swollen by humidity but carefully preserved. Nautical instruments, compasses, and radios, some dismantled, some meticulously maintained, filled every available surface. Among them were symbols Jack recognized instantly, unit-style markings, coded notations, and military shorthand no civilian hobbyist would know. This wasn't clutter. It was obsession. Jack stepped inside slowly, Ace following close, his growl fading, but his posture rigid, watchful. Jack picked up a journal, flipping through pages dense with encrypted notes and weather logs. Whoever had owned this boat hadn't drifted through life. He had mapped it, tracked it, guarded something with methodical precision. Then Ace stopped. The dog stood perfectly still in the center of the cabin, staring at the floor. He lifted his head, eyes locking onto Jack's, and let out a single long howl, low, echoing, and unmistakably urgent. Jack felt it then. Footsteps, not on the boat, on the dock, slow, deliberate, approaching. Jack turned toward the cabin door, muscles coiling, every sense sharpened by training he'd hoped never to need again. Outside, the winter sun still shone bright on the snow-covered planks, but the sound of boots against wood was getting closer, and whoever was walking toward the yacht was not trying to be quiet. The footsteps Jack had heard grew louder on the sunlit planks, crisp and unhurried, the sound of someone who knew he would be noticed and did not mind. Jack shifted subtly, placing himself between the cabin door and Ace, his body angled as it had been 100 times in other places, other winters, where hesitation had cost lives. Ace remained rigid, head low, eyes fixed forward, his breath slow but deliberate, the posture of a working dog waiting for permission rather than reacting on instinct. The marina looked peaceful under the winter glare. Snow piled along the railings, river ice flashing like broken glass, but Jack had learned long ago that danger preferred bright, ordinary settings where no one expected it. The man stepped into view at the edge of the dock and stopped several feet away, careful not to cross an invisible line. He was in his early 40s, perhaps, tall and lean in a tailored charcoal coat that did not belong to Bozeman winters. His hair was dark, neatly combed, untouched by snow, and his face was smooth in a way that suggested regular mirrors and careful maintenance rather than vanity. A faint smile rested on his lips, practiced and symmetrical, the kind meant to disarm rather than invite. His hands were bare despite the cold, fingers long and clean, nails trimmed short. This was a man accustomed to warm interiors and colder negotiations. "Jack Walker," the man said easily, voice calm, urban, carrying a hint of authority softened by courtesy. "I was hoping to catch you before you left." Jack did not answer immediately. He studied the man's stance, the way his weight rested evenly on both feet, the absence of nervous movement. This was not a local fisherman or a curious marina wanderer. This was someone who planned his entrances. Ace took one step forward, nose lifting, and inhaled deeply. His ears flattened slightly, and a low growl returned, sharper this time. The man noticed. His smile tightened by a fraction, though he made no move backward. "That's quite a dog," he said, glancing at Ace with measured interest. "German Shepherd, if I'm not mistaken." "He works," Jack replied, his tone flat. "Of course he does." The man nodded, then extended a hand that Jack did not take. "Ethan Cole. I represent private clients with nautical interests." Jack's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "You're standing on a public dock and having a private conversation," Ethan replied smoothly, withdrawing his hand without offense. "I heard about the yacht. Word travels quickly in small circles, especially when something changes hands after a long time." Ace stepped fully in front of Jack then, his body forming a solid barrier, teeth visible now, lips pulled back in a silent warning. Ethan's gaze dropped to the dog, then lifted again, calculating. He didn't retreat, but he adjusted his coat, subtly increasing distance by a half step. "I'll be brief," Ethan said. "My client is prepared to purchase the vessel today. As is. Cash. No inspections, no delays." Jack folded his arms, the movement deliberate. You haven't named a price. Ethan's smile returned. $50,000. The number hung in the cold air, absurd against the backdrop of peeling paint and warped wood. Jack did not react, but something settled into place inside him, a familiar internal click. If this yacht was scrap, no one offered $50,000 without even stepping aboard. "I'm not selling," Jack said. Ethan studied him for a long moment, eyes flicking briefly to the cabin door behind Jack, then to Ace, then back to Jack's face. "You haven't even seen what you own yet." "That's not your concern." "On the contrary," Ethan replied softly. "Boats like this become burdens quickly. Slip fees, insurance, environmental liabilities. You could end up paying to get rid of it. My client's offer is generous." Ace growled again, deeper now, his nose inches from Ethan's coat. Ethan inhaled sharply, the first crack in his composure, and raised his hand slightly. "Easy," he said, though whether he meant Ace or himself was unclear. Jack took a step forward. "Conversation's over." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, I'll leave my number." He reached into his pocket, producing a pristine card, and placed it carefully on a nearby piling rather than offering it directly. "The offer stands. For now." As Ethan turned and walked away, his footsteps receding along the dock, Jack watched until the man disappeared between rows of boats. Only then did he exhale. Ace remained alert, eyes following the path Ethan had taken until Jack touched his shoulder lightly. "Good," Jack murmured. "You did good." Inside the cabin, the air felt heavier than before. Jack closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, listening. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps, only the river shifting beneath ice and the faint hum of wind along the hull. He moved back to the center of the cabin, his eyes drawn again to the walls. That was when he noticed it clearly. One section of wood paneling along the starboard side did not align perfectly with the rest. The spacing was off by a fraction of an inch, subtle enough to escape a casual glance but glaring once seen. Jack crouched, running his fingers along the seam. The wood was solid, but the proportions were wrong. He glanced toward the windows, half expecting to see Ethan's reflection staring back. Nothing. Snowlight poured in, clean and unforgiving. Ace approached the panel and sniffed, then pawed once, deliberately, as if confirming Jack's suspicion. Jack straightened slowly. He had seen false walls before, in places where people hid things they could not afford to lose or be found with. His pulse quickened, not with excitement, but with the weight of consequence. Whatever was behind that wall had drawn Ethan Cole across states, into the open, in broad daylight. Jack reached out and placed his hand on the edge of the panel. At that exact moment, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He froze. Slowly, he pulled it free and looked at the screen. No number, no name, just a single message glowing against the winter light. "Don't open it. You're being watched." Jack lifted his head, eyes scanning the cabin, the windows, the dock beyond. Ace stiffened beside him, ears pricked, muscles coiled. Outside, the marina remained bright and ordinary, snow shining, people moving in the distance, life continuing as if nothing had changed. But Jack knew better. Somewhere between the river and the dock, between the yacht and the city, lines had been crossed, and he had just stepped onto the wrong side of them. By late morning, the sky had cleared to a hard, flawless blue, and sunlight spilled across Bozeman like a blade laid flat on snow. The cold remained merciless, but the light made everything visible, honest in a way darkness never was. Jack returned to the marina with a small duffel slung over one shoulder, his movements deliberate and unhurried, the way he'd learned to move when being watched mattered. Inside the bag were basic tools: crowbar, flashlight, gloves, a compact screwdriver set. Nothing exotic, nothing that would raise eyebrows if anyone glanced his way. Ace walked close at his side, head level, eyes working constantly, the German shepherd's thick coat gleaming against the white world. Scars faint but visible beneath the fur like old punctuation marks in a long sentence. Jack did not park near the yacht. He left his truck 2 rows back among other winter-idled vehicles and approached on foot, boots crunching steadily. He paused once to scan the dock, counting boats, people, angles. Nothing obvious had changed since yesterday. The marina still looked like a postcard. Sunlit planks, frost-laced railings, river ice shifting lazily beneath the surface. That normalcy made Jack more cautious, not less. Ace sensed it and slowed, positioning himself at Jack's knee as they stepped aboard the yacht. Inside the cabin, the air was colder than Jack expected, trapped and stale, with that same sharp undertone he'd noticed before. Metal. Oil. Something sealed too long. Jack set the duffel down quietly and nodded once to Ace. The dog moved to the door and lay down, body angled to block the entrance, ears forward, eyes never leaving the narrow window. He looked less like a pet and more like a sentry carved from muscle and intent. Jack knelt by the misaligned panel along the starboard wall. In daylight, the flaw was undeniable. The wood grain did not match the adjacent boards, and the seam had been filled with marine cork rather than standard caulking. Professional work. Old, but careful. Jack slid on his gloves and tested the panel again, pressing along the edges. There, a slight give. Not enough to betray itself to a casual hand, but enough for someone who knew pressure points and false walls. He worked slowly, prying just enough to break the seal without splintering the wood. The cork crumbled with a dry, brittle sound, and the panel shifted outward. Jack caught it before it fell, lifting it free and setting it aside. Behind it was a narrow cavity running nearly the length of the cabin, deeper than Jack had expected, its interior lined with reinforced framing that suggested forethought, not improvisation. The smell intensified instantly. Oilcloth, aged metal, a faint tang like old coins held too long in a closed fist. Inside the cavity were packages, dozens of them, rectangular, uniform, wrapped in deteriorating plastic and canvas, stacked with military precision. Jack's breath slowed. This was not a stash. This was inventory. He reached in and pulled one free. It was heavier than it looked, dense in a way that made his wrist tighten. Jack set it carefully on the table, peeled back the outer layer, then the inner, revealing an oil-soaked cloth wrapped tight around a metal case. He opened it. Gold. Not decorative, not symbolic, real bars, dull rather than shiny, stamped with serial numbers and seals. Jack stared at them, his jaw tightening. He had seen gold like this before, not in vaults, but in briefings that never made it onto official slides. Assets moved quietly, money that didn't exist on paper because it wasn't supposed to exist at all. He picked up one bar, feeling its weight pulled downward, undeniable, final. The markings were foreign, dated decades earlier, and among them was a symbol that made Jack's stomach knot, a stylized crest he recognized from a classified operation that had ended badly, an operation officially denied, its participants reassigned, silenced, or buried beneath other explanations. Jack set the bar down slowly. Ace shifted at the door, claws scraping once against the wood. Jack glanced up. "Hold," he whispered. The dog froze, muscles tight, eyes narrowing. Jack returned his attention to the compartment. He counted quickly, methodically, stopping at 30 without reaching the end. His mind began assembling implications the way it once assembled mission parameters. This amount of gold wasn't personal wealth. It was leverage. It was history that someone had tried to erase and failed to finish erasing. Jack replaced the bar, rewrapping it carefully, restoring the layers as best he could. He did not remove more. He had learned the cost of greed early and the cost of curiosity soon after. He slid the packages back into place and set the panel loosely against the opening without sealing it. Not yet. Ace stood abruptly. The sound was subtle, almost nothing. A shift of weight, a change in air. But Ace reacted as if a switch had flipped. He turned his head sharply toward the cabin window and growled, low and continuous, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Jack followed the dog's gaze and felt the familiar chill creep up his spine. Across the marina, partially obscured by a row of boats, a black sedan sat parked where it hadn't been earlier. The car did not belong here. Its lines were too clean, its windows too dark, its presence too intentional. Sunlight flashed briefly off glass, and Jack realized what he was seeing a half-second too late. A lens, long, narrow, pointed directly at the cabin window. Someone was watching, not casually, not curiously, documenting. Jack moved instantly, stepping between the window and the compartment, his body blocking sightlines. He reached for the panel, sliding it back into place with controlled urgency. Ace's growl deepened, his body vibrating with restrained force, teeth bared now, breath steady and lethal. Jack sealed the panel just enough to hide the cavity and grabbed the duffel. He did not look back at the car again. Looking would confirm what he already knew and give the watcher exactly what they wanted. Acknowledgement. He clipped Ace's leash on silently and waited. Seconds stretched. The lens remained fixed. Jack exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. Whatever had been hidden in this boat was no longer dormant. It had woken something. Or someone. Ace let out a sharp, warning bark then, sudden and echoing, the sound cracking the stillness like a gunshot. The lens withdrew. The car did not move. Not yet. Jack did not return home directly from the marina. He took the long way through Bozeman, looping through residential streets dusted in snow, crossing the river twice, watching reflections in storefront glass and side mirrors, the way he once watched desert horizons. The black sedan never reappeared, but that didn't reassure him. It only meant whoever was watching knew how to wait. Ace rode in the passenger seat, massive head resting just below the window, amber eyes tracking every passing shadow. The German Shepherd was 4 years old, battle-trained, disciplined, but Jack could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from steel. Ace understood without instruction that something had shifted from observation to pursuit. Jack's house sat at the edge of town, a modest, single-story place with clean lines and no ornamentation, chosen years earlier for its sightlines and lack of neighbors. Snow lay undisturbed across the yard, glowing faintly under the overcast afternoon light. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, oil, and pine cleaner. Jack locked the door, engaged the secondary bolt, then removed a single gold bar from his jacket, wrapped carefully in cloth. He placed it on the kitchen table beneath a bright overhead light. The gold looked heavier here, more real, as if it resisted being indoors. Jack studied the markings with the same patience he once used to study satellite photos before insertion. Serial numbers, foreign seals, dates that clustered around the late 1960s. He photographed every angle, then powered up his laptop. Ace lay down at his feet, body positioned to face the hallway, ears rotating slightly as he listened to the house breathe. Jack's search took hours. He cross-referenced markings, old shipping records, declassified documents buried deep in academic archives. A pattern emerged slowly, like bones pushing through snow. Decades earlier, during a period of coups and proxy wars, a national gold reserve had vanished during civil unrest. Officially, it was written off as looted, melted down, unrecoverable. Unofficially, the names connected to the disappearance shared an unsettling pattern: sudden deaths, apparent suicides, men who stepped off balconies or drove into rivers without explanation. Others simply vanished, leaving families and unfinished stories behind. Jack leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. He had seen this before. Not the gold, but the aftermath. Assets moved quietly to fund operations no one would claim. When things went wrong, history was edited. People became footnotes or cautionary tales. The gold on his table wasn't just stolen, it was hunted. His phone rang. Jack didn't jump, but Ace did, rising instantly, head snapping toward the sound. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but Jack already knew who it would be. "Walker," he answered. "Jack." Ethan Cole's voice slid through the line with practiced ease, though the warmth was gone. "I was hoping we could talk. Again. I've spoken to my client." Jack glanced at the gold bar. "You don't say." "The offer has changed," Ethan continued. "Significantly. 200,000. Cash. Today." Jack smiled faintly, humorless. "You were right about one thing. Boats are expensive." There was a pause, just long enough to be deliberate. When Ethan spoke again, the tone had sharpened. "You're a Navy SEAL, Jack. You understand how the world actually works. Some things don't belong to the person holding them. They belong to history, to power. They belong to whoever can sleep at night," Jack replied. Ethan exhaled softly. "Careful. Idealism ages badly." Jack ended the call without another word. He set the phone down and stared at the wall for a long moment, the weight of the gold pressing into his thoughts. He finally understood the shape of the problem. The gold was not looking for an owner. Its previous custodians were looking for it, and they were close enough now to negotiate openly. Night fell without darkness. Snow reflected the sky's pale glow, turning the world outside into a dim mirror. Jack cooked a simple meal he barely touched. Ace stayed within arm's reach the entire time, following him from room to room, nails clicking softly on hardwood. When Jack finally sat, he placed the gold bar back into its wrapping and secured it inside a steel toolbox bolted to the floor of his workshop. He checked the doors. the windows, the cameras. Sometime after midnight, the sound came. A faint metallic click, barely audible, like a fingernail tapping a coin. Ace reacted instantly, launching from his resting spot and racing toward the front door, a snarl tearing from his chest. Jack was on his feet in the same moment, heart rate spiking not with fear but with clarity. He moved without noise, hand on the edge of the wall, eyes scanning the darkened entryway. Another sound, softer, scraping. Jack flicked on the exterior light. Outside, the yard lay empty, snow unbroken except for one place near the door. He opened it cautiously, Ace straining at his side, and knelt to inspect the lock. Fresh marks scored the metal, thin, precise scratches made by a tool, not a key. Someone had tested it, someone patient, someone confident enough to try and walk away. Jack stood slowly, cold settling into his bones. He closed the door and locked it again, leaning his forehead briefly against the wood. This was no longer a question of curiosity or profit. It was a countdown. Ace looked up at him, eyes steady, waiting for direction. Jack rested a hand on the dog's head, fingers threading through thick fur. "They're not asking anymore," he said quietly. Outside, the snow continued to glow, innocent and blinding, and somewhere in the white-lit night, someone was planning their next move. The cafe sat on the edge of Lindley Park, its wide windows facing a field of snow so bright it hurt to look at directly, the kind of winter light that erased shadows and made everything feel exposed. Jack arrived early and chose a table with a clear view of the door and the park beyond. He removed his gloves slowly, letting his fingers adjust to the warmth, and rested them around a chipped ceramic mug. Ace lay beneath the table, massive body tucked neatly, chin on paws, amber eyes tracking reflections in the glass. The German shepherd's posture was calm but alert, the stillness of a professional doing a quiet job. Jack hadn't told anyone about the meeting. The message had come through a number that vanished immediately after delivery. Coffee, noon, Parkside. I knew your family. He didn't believe in coincidences anymore, but he believed in patterns, and this one had weight. The bell above the cafe door rang softly at 12:02. The man who entered moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned to conserve strength. He was in his late 70s, perhaps older, with a narrow frame wrapped in a faded navy peacoat that had seen real sea air. His hair was silver white, combed back neatly, revealing a deeply lined forehead and a scar that cut through his right eyebrow. His skin was weathered and darkened by sun rather than age alone, the complexion of a man who had lived outdoors for decades. His eyes were sharp and brown, still alive with humor and caution in equal measure. When he smiled, it was brief and incomplete, as if smiling fully had once been a liability. He walked with a cane, not because he needed it to stand, Jack noted, but because it reminded people to underestimate him. "Jack Walker," the old man said, stopping at the table. His voice was accented lightly, Spanish softened by years in America. "You look like your father did at that age. Same shoulders, same way of sitting like the chair might betray you." Jack didn't stand. "You have the wrong table." The old man's smile flickered. "Frank Ramirez," he said, pulling out the chair opposite Jack and sitting without waiting for permission. "I sailed with your uncle, and before that with the man who owned that yacht before the rust took her name." Ace lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring. Frank glanced down at the dog, eyes brightening. "Still working dogs," he murmured approvingly. "Good. Means you haven't softened." Jack studied him closely now, noting the calluses on his hands, the faint tremor that came not from fear but age, the posture of someone who had once stood watch for long nights at sea. "You picked a public place," Jack said. "Why?" Frank's gaze shifted to the park, to children bundled in bright coats sledding down a shallow hill. "Because men who want you quiet prefer shadows," he replied, "and because I am tired of running." He reached into his coat and set an envelope on the table, thick and yellowed, its edges worn smooth. "The gold," Frank said quietly. "We used to call it history's blood, because it always ends up buying more death than bread." Jack didn't touch the envelope. "You know where it came from." "I helped hide it," Frank said without hesitation. "And I helped the man who hid it swear an oath he kept until it killed him." Frank spoke then of coups and ports that never made maps, of nights when ships moved without lights and men without names. He spoke of how the gold had been taken not to enrich one man, but to keep it from funding massacres, from being turned into rifles and contracts signed in clean rooms far from the blood. The owner of the yacht, Frank said, had believed that time could change the world enough to return the gold safely. Time had been crueler than expected. He chose you, Frank said, finally meeting Jack's eyes again, because he watched you from a distance, the deployments, the commendations you never talk about, the court-martial you avoided by telling the truth when lying would have saved your career. Frank smiled thinly. Men like you are rare. Rarer still when they stay that way. Jack felt the words settle like weight. He thought of the operations that had changed him, of the moment he had refused an order that crossed a line, and the price he'd paid for it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Frank slid the envelope closer. Inside are contacts, journalists who don't bend, lawyers who understand repatriation, and a location where evidence can be delivered safely. Not today, not tomorrow. When you're ready. He leaned back slightly, breath shallow. The people hunting that gold will try to buy you first. When that fails, they will remind you that you are human. Jack glanced at the park again. "You're putting a target on me." Frank nodded. "You already have one." The server approached, a young woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, and Frank ordered coffee, black, no sugar. When she left, he lowered his voice. "There is one more thing. Do not keep the gold together, and do not trust anyone who speaks about national interests without naming a nation." Jack finally picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. "Why are you telling me this now?" Frank's eyes softened. "Because I'm old," he said. "And because ghosts don't scare me anymore." They finished in silence. Frank drank half his coffee and stood, adjusting his coat. He nodded once to Jack and once more to Ace. "Good dog," he said. "Protect him." Jack stood as well. "Where can I find you?" Frank's smile returned, sadder this time. "You can't." They walked out together into the blinding winter light. The cold bit instantly, clean and sharp. As Jack stepped onto the sidewalk, Ace suddenly pulled hard on the leash, a sharp tug that snapped Jack's attention back toward the cafe window. Frank Ramirez was gone. The chair sat empty, coffee untouched. On the tabletop lay a small, folded piece of paper that had not been there seconds earlier. Jack picked it up with gloved fingers and opened it. "They are coming," Ace growled softly, the sound carrying through the bright, innocent snow. Jack chose daylight on purpose. He called Emily Parker from a burner phone while walking Ace along a snow-bright trail that cut through Bozeman's riverfront, the winter sun bouncing hard off the ice so that every surface looked scrubbed clean. Emily answered on the second ring, her voice steady, professional, carrying the calm of someone who had learned to listen before reacting. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean with an athlete's posture, auburn hair usually pulled back into a low knot, pale, freckled skin that burned easily in summer and went porcelain white in winter. Her eyes, sharp green behind thin rectangular glasses, had earned a reputation for seeing through men who hid behind titles. Years earlier, she had exposed a development scandal that collapsed a political dynasty in Helena, and the lawsuit that followed had hardened her without making her cynical. She believed in evidence, not heroics. They met an hour later in a public library conference room flooded with light. Jack laid out the facts without drama: the yacht, the gold, the offers, the pressure. Emily listened, fingers steepled, then asked for proof. Jack slid the envelope Frank Ramirez had given him across the table and said one sentence: "I want them to confess in daylight." Emily nodded once. "Then we don't run," she said. "We let them come to us." The Meridian Club sat at the center of downtown Bozeman like a polished tooth, all glass and stone, its lobby gleaming under chandeliers that reflected winter light into 1,000 angles. Jack arrived early, dressed simply, nothing that announced money or menace. Ace walked at heel, leash loose, his massive frame drawing glances that Jack ignored. The club allowed dogs only on the terrace, but Ethan Cole had arranged an exception, and the receptionist, young, nervous, and overtrained, looked relieved to hand them off. Ethan waited near the elevators, immaculate as ever in a tailored coat, hair perfect, smile thin. He greeted Jack with a familiarity that felt rehearsed. "You came," he said. "Wise." Jack gave a non-committal nod. "Let's talk." They ascended to a private floor where a suite opened onto floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Snow blanketed rooftops below, turning Bozeman into a model city, small and harmless. Inside, 3 people waited. The first was an older woman, Patricia Morrison, late 60s, elegant in a bone-colored suit that fit her like armor. Her silver hair was cut short and precise, her skin smooth in the way only money could maintain. Her eyes were pale blue and assessing, a gaze that had learned to judge worth quickly and move on. Beside her sat James Morrison, her son, mid-40s, broad-shouldered with a lawyer's haircut and a permanent crease between his brows. His hands were manicured, his jaw clenched as if holding something back. The third was Sophia Morrison, early 30s, slender, dark-haired, bored in the way of people who had never been told no. She watched Jack with open curiosity, lips curved in a faint, amused smile. Introductions were brief. Patricia gestured for Jack to sit. Ace lay down at Jack's feet without command, eyes forward, body relaxed but coiled, a living weapon on safety. Emily Parker was not present, but she didn't need to be. Jack wore a discreet recorder beneath his jacket, and a camera the size of a shirt button blinked once as it synced. Patricia spoke first. "We appreciate discretion," she said. "What's on that boat has a complicated history." "History doesn't complicate theft," Jack replied mildly. James leaned forward. "That gold was already stolen when it was hidden," he said. "It was redirected, for stability." "For death," Jack said. Sophia laughed softly, a sound like glass chimes. "Words," she said. "Gold is just metal." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You have something we want," she said. "We're prepared to compensate you generously." Jack feigned consideration, asking questions, pressing just enough to let them talk. They admitted knowing the yacht's lineage, the years it had moved quietly, the reason they had waited until now. They spoke of national interests without naming a nation, of families who had protected assets across generations. James slipped once, calling the gold ours, then corrected himself with a thin smile. Throughout it all, Ace did not move. His eyes never left James's hands. When the meeting ended, Patricia stood. "Think carefully," she said. "Men who make the wrong choice tend to disappear." Jack rose, calm. "I'll be in touch." Ethan escorted Jack to the elevator. The doors closed, sealing them in mirrored quiet. As the car descended, Ethan's reflection shifted closer. He leaned in, breath warm against Jack's ear, voice barely a whisper. "We know where you live." The doors opened. Jack stepped out into the bright lobby without turning around. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, timed with cruel precision. Emily Parker's byline appeared across national outlets before the sun had fully climbed above the Bridger Mountains, the headline stark against a background photo of the rusted yacht frozen at the marina. By noon, federal interest was no longer theoretical. Unmarked cars began appearing near city offices, and the tone of phone calls shifted from cautious curiosity to clipped authority. Emily called Jack once, briefly, her voice steady but urgent. "They're moving faster than I expected," she said, "and they're not hiding anymore." Neither were the others. Jack felt it first on Main Street, walking Ace beneath a sky so bright the snow reflected light upward into their faces, turning the world into a white corridor with nowhere to hide. Ace, 4 years old and built like a living barricade, moved at Jack's side with disciplined precision, but his ears kept flicking back, nostrils flaring. Half a block behind them, a man in a gray parka slowed when they slowed, stopped when they stopped. When Jack crossed the street without warning, the man crossed too, his reflection briefly flashing in a storefront window. He was in his 30s, clean-shaven, hair cropped short, posture casual, but eyes too alert, not local, not subtle. By the time Jack reached the corner, a second tail had appeared ahead, this one a woman, tall and athletic in a white coat that blended too well with the snow. Her blonde hair was tucked into a beanie, her face expressionless as she pretended to check her phone. She glanced up just long enough to confirm Jack's direction. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer surveillance, it was pressure. Jack didn't run. Running invited mistakes. Instead, he turned deliberately into a crowded plaza, sunlight bouncing off the ice sculptures set up for a winter festival. Families laughed, children shouted, cameras flashed. The hunters followed anyway, unconcerned with witnesses. Ace growled once, low and dangerous, and Jack felt the leash tighten slightly as the dog adjusted position, placing himself half a step behind Jack's knee, the stance he took when preparing to intercept. Jack made a decision then. He changed plans. The safe location was a decommissioned ranger station outside town, a squat concrete building buried halfway into a hillside. Its access road kept clear by county plows but rarely used. Jack drove there without headlights, trusting the snow's glow and his memory. Ace sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes fixed forward, muscles taut. When they arrived, Jack unloaded a single waterproof case containing copies of Emily's evidence, encrypted drives, and a ledger pulled from the yacht's cabin. He secured it inside a steel locker bolted into the station's foundation and keyed the code into memory, not his phone. Only then did he check the marina cameras. The footage froze his blood. Sometime after midnight, figures had boarded. The yacht, 3 of them, moving with professional efficiency, faces masked, no wasted motion. They knew exactly where to go. The false panel was opened, contents removed selectively, not greedily. When they finished, one of them paused. The camera caught the moment clearly as he bent down and placed something on the cabin table. Ace's spare collar. The thick nylon band had been sliced clean through, the cut precise, surgical. A message without words. Jack closed his eyes for a second longer than necessary. He had been threatened before. He had been hunted. But this was different. Ace was not equipment. He was not leverage. He was family. The message arrived minutes later, as if timed to his discovery. Unknown number, simple text, cold font, handed over, or the dog pays first. Jack's jaw tightened until it ached. Ace pressed his head against Jack's thigh, sensing the shift, the heat behind the calm. Jack knelt and gripped the dog's face gently, thumbs brushing the scars that marked battles they had survived together. "They won't touch you," he said quietly. "I promise." Outside, the wind lifted loose snow into the air, sweeping the ground clean as if erasing footprints. Jack stood and looked toward the mountains, mind working through contingencies. This was no longer about exposure alone. It was about protection, about ending the chase on his terms. He pulled out his phone and typed a reply. No delivery without proof of life. The response came almost instantly. "Tomorrow, noon, old rail yard." Jack stared at the words, then deleted the thread and powered the phone down. He knew the rail yard, a wide, open expanse bleached white by snow, visible from every angle, impossible to approach unseen. A place chosen to make him feel small. He smiled without humor. They had chosen wrong. Jack clipped Ace's collar back on with deliberate care, his hands steady despite the storm behind his eyes. "We finish this," he murmured. Ace looked up at him, amber eyes unwavering, tail still, ready. As they drove back toward town, the sky darkened slightly, clouds rolling in from the west. Snow began to fall again, soft at first, then thicker, muting sound, swallowing distance. Jack welcomed it. Snow hid many things, but it also remembered every step. And tomorrow, someone was going to leave tracks they couldn't erase. Jack chose the marina again because truth, like water, deserved to surface where it had been hidden. Morning light washed Bozeman in white and gold, fresh snow falling in slow, almost ceremonial flakes that softened every sound. The river docks looked harmless under the sun, wooden planks bleached bright, ice drifting lazily along the current as if the past had finally decided to move on. Jack stood near slip 47, with his collar turned up against the cold, his posture relaxed in a way only a man prepared for violence could afford. At his side sat Ace, 4 years old, broad-chested and steady, black and tan fur brushed clean, amber eyes alert but calm. The German shepherd's scarred shoulder was visible beneath his harness, a reminder of battles survived and lessons learned. He was not tense now. He was ready. Emily Parker watched from a distance near the parking lot, phone pressed to her ear, auburn hair tucked beneath a wool cap, her breath fogging the air as she spoke quietly to federal agents positioned out of sight. She had learned when to step forward and when to let evidence speak for itself. Today, she let the plan unfold. 2 unmarked vehicles sat further down the road, engines idling, their occupants patient and focused. One of them was Special Agent Marcus Hale, mid-40s, tall and angular with close-cropped hair and a face permanently set in a thoughtful frown. Hale had spent 20 years following money trails that led nowhere until they suddenly led everywhere. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it meant a case was about to close. The bait was simple. Jack had allowed word to spread, carefully, deliberately, that he was ready to make a deal. A daytime exchange. No shadows, no secrecy. The Morrison family had taken it, unable to resist reclaiming what they believed had always been theirs. A black SUV rolled into the marina lot just after 10, its tires crunching softly over snow. James Morrison stepped out first, coat collar up, jaw tight, eyes scanning the dock with controlled irritation. He looked thinner than before, the confidence chipped by exposure and subpoenas. Behind him emerged a man Jack had never seen before, younger, late 30s, athletic build, dark stubble lining his jaw, eyes restless and sharp. This was a courier, Jack knew, someone used to moving things quickly and quietly. He carried himself like a runner waiting for the starting gun. Ace rose smoothly to his feet. His nose lifted, drawing in the air, sorting 1,000 cents into meaning. Jack felt the leash tighten slightly, not alarm, but focus. Ace knew this smell. Not James Morrison, but the other man. Oil, canvas, old metal, the yacht. Jack walked forward, hands visible, expression neutral. "You brought the money?" he asked. James gestured to the SUV. "You brought what belongs to us?" "Depends who you think us is," Jack replied. Before James could answer, Ace pulled hard, head snapping toward the SUV's rear. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then lunged forward, dragging Jack a step before Jack released the leash. Ace circled the vehicle, nose pressed to seams, tail stiff, body vibrating with certainty. He stopped at the rear hatch and sat abruptly, staring at it. "That's enough," James snapped. "Control your dog." Jack smiled thinly. "He is controlled." Agent Hale moved first. He stepped out from behind a parked truck, badge raised, voice carrying cleanly across the dock. "Federal agents, nobody move." Chaos tried to form and failed. The courier bolted, slipping on ice after 2 steps as Ace launched, faster than muscle memory, tackling him cleanly to the ground. The man hit hard, breath knocked out, gold clinking faintly from a duffel that burst open beside him. Bars spilled onto the snow, dull and undeniable. Agents swarmed. James Morrison froze, shoulders sagging, the fight draining out of him as cuffs closed around his wrists. It ended quickly, cleanly, in daylight. Over the next weeks, the story unfolded exactly as truth tends to when it finally has room to breathe. Emily's recordings, Jack's evidence, and the recovered gold connected accounts, shell companies, and decades of quiet corruption. Patricia Morrison resigned from every board she sat on and retreated from public life. Sophia vanished into a haze of lawyers and private flights. James took a plea deal that sounded generous until the numbers were read aloud. The yacht was seized, the remaining gold was cataloged, authenticated, and, through channels Frank Ramirez had prepared long ago, returned to the country it had been stolen from, earmarked not for politicians but for museums, schools, and restitution funds. Jack testified once, briefly. Then he went home. Spring did not come quickly to Bozeman, but the worst of winter loosened its grip. Jack moved out of his old place into a small house closer to town, warm and unremarkable, with a yard where Ace could run. He took a job at a marine repair shop by the river, hands busy, mind quiet. He did not become rich, he became steady. On a clear winter morning not long after, sunlight spilled through the trees as Jack stood on his porch, breath rising in soft clouds. Ace sat beside him, tail thumping once against the boards. Jack knelt and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's broad skull, fingers tracing familiar scars. "We're done," he said softly. "We're going home." Ace leaned into the touch, calm and content. Across the city, snow fell gently, covering old tracks, leaving Bozeman clean and bright again, as if it had never known darkness at all. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive as lightning from the sky. They come quietly, disguised as a choice. In a world where power often buries truth, where money can silence history, this story reminds us of something ancient and sacred. God still works through ordinary people who choose to do what is right when no one is watching. Jack was not the strongest man alive. He was not the richest. He was simply a man who refused to sell his soul. and a loyal dog who never left his side. The gold was never the miracle. The miracle was courage. The miracle was integrity. The miracle was that, even in a broken world, truth still found a way home. In our daily lives, we may never face secrets worth millions, but every day we are given smaller tests. To be honest when it costs us, to protect those who depend on us, to stand firm when fear whispers that it would be easier to walk away. If you're watching this today and carrying a burden, if you're standing at a crossroads only you can see, remember this: God honors the quiet courage of those who choose light over comfort. May the Lord watch over you and your family. May He give you strength when the path is unclear, peace when the world feels heavy, and courage to do what is right, even when it's hard. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you believe that some truths are worth protecting, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. May God bless you, guide you, and keep you safe. And remember, sometimes the greatest treasure we leave behind is not what we keep, but the truth we choose to protect.